Battletech has a setting that has been 40 years in the making. There are many points of time in this future history that are already quite well covered, but today we are not talking about those. Today we are talking about the checkered past of the Exiled First Prince and how the Federated Suns face the biggest threat to their continued existence since the Succession Wars. In the years leading up to the Ilclan Era, the Federated Suns had been crippled by war. The Draconis Combine remained an ever-present threat to stability. The Capellan Confederation had gained more ground than anybody thought possible, retaking their former capital from the very clutches of its captors. The Republic, fighting wars on multiple fronts, was hard-pressed to offer their traditional allies any aid during their time of crisis, and even greater calamity was about to befall the House of Davion. In June of the year 3144, First Prince Caleb Davion was killed on the world of Palmyra by the Fifth Sword of Light, a Draconis Combine mustered soldiery force. To some, this was a huge surprise and an upset. To others, this was a foregone conclusion. Caleb Davion was infamous for destroying all the progress of his predecessors, consolidating power and routing vast authority through his position as the First Prince. Worse yet, his succession was not a popular one, with rumors abound that Harebrained Davion, Caleb's father, had considered Caleb's cousin Julian as his successor, rather than his only biological child Caleb, and darker rumors still hinted at Caleb committing patricide over the indignity of it. Harrison had erased Julian as his own following the death of Julian's father, Christopher, when Julian was only 13, considering him more of his proper heir than his own son Caleb, who had a concerning condition that would likely affect his ability to rule. Harrison had even named Julian the Prince's Champion after a notable performance putting out brush fires on the Taurian Concordat border early in Julian's military career. Upon his appointment to Prince's Champion, Julian was tasked by Harrison to honor the Federated Suns alliance with the Republic of the Sphere. Julian organized a task force and set off into Republic space to assist the Republic in an internal conflict against the rebellious members of the Senate Alliance. Julian's honorary command, the 1st Davion Guards, went with him. After the funeral reception for the former First Prince, Victor Steiner Davion, the then Prince, Harebrained Davion, was found in critical condition at the chalet he had been staying, appearing to have sustained injuries from a fall from the chalet's balcony. These injuries would result in Harrison slipping into a coma from which he would never wake. Caleb ascended the throne shortly after, promptly stripping his cousin of his title as the Prince's Champion, out of spite and out of fear of Julian's popular support. Caleb also ordered the taking of Republic worlds back into the Federated Suns after the enactment of the Fortress Republic, which saw the core of the Republic abandoning its outermost holdings. Upon this effort to retake public worlds, Caleb would cross paths with the Capellans in a three-way war with the Republic. The First Prince Caleb Davion would later meet Denai Liao Centrilla, heir to the infamous Yenlo Wang battlemech. Caleb became obsessed with her, and bad blood ensued after a particularly heinous assault upon the Capellan noble of the most detestable kind. The unspeakable act not fit for naming here. This was compounded by the betrayal, as the two had been downed behind enemy lines together and had started to build camaraderie. This act led Caleb to becoming fraught with the fear of Capellan retaliation. It may also have had something to do with the vows of Denai, who claimed that she would kill the First Prince if they ever met again. Or it also may have had something to do with his condition, one that had seen him wash out of Mechwarrior training. Caleb suffered from paranoid delusions and schizophrenia. Caleb's cousin Julian would learn of this himself when visited by a distant relative, bearing proof that Harrison Davion had planned on presenting him, had he not suffered an untimely demise. Proof of Caleb's condition, and proof of Julian's grooming for leadership. Julian, resentful of having such responsibility thrust upon him, hesitated to act upon this information. Soon, he would no longer need to. First Prince Caleb Davion overcompensated on the Federated Suns borders shared with the Confederation, pulling troops from other postings to the detriment of the Curitan border. A particularly brash offensive was botched by Duke Corwin Sandoval, who was acting in direct opposition to his orders not to instigate any conflicts with the Combine, leaving an opening for counterattack. The Draconis Combine did not ignore this opportunity and seized the chance to capture the Draconis Reach in its entirety, an area of disputed ownership that had been simmering between the Dragon and the Suns since the late 3080s. It was around 3140 that the Archon of the Lyran Commonwealth, Melissa Steiner, asked the Federated Suns for help. Clan Wolf and Clan Jade Falcon were ravaging her realm. But this did not interest Caleb, as he was wholly focused on affairs of his own state. The current Princess Champion, Eric Sandoval, convinced Caleb that some kind of response was needed, and the First Prince took the opportunity to kill two birds with one stone. The cousin he despised, former Princess Champion Julian Davion, would make for an excellent token of aid, and maybe he would even die in the conflict if Caleb was lucky enough. Doing as he was bid, Julian departed, taking his first Davion guards and the remnants of his task force into Lyran space to coordinate with the Kellhounds. The renowned mercenary outfit had also fought against Senatorial Alliance rebel forces before the walls of the fortress were erected, making the joining of forces convenient. The joint task force would ultimately join the Kellhounds in the defense of the Lyran capital of Tharkad. This defense would prove unsuccessful. Both clans Jade Falcon and Wolf descended upon the world, smashing through the defenders at the Royal Palace and killing Melissa Steiner, despite her already being removed from power by the machinations of Viday Brewer. The First Prince Caleb Davion's deteriorating mental condition continued to worsen. At an alarming rate, he saw his childhood friend and other figments of his imagination in every reflection. It made him sluggish to respond to what was actually happening to his realm. By the time the First Prince had finally reacted to the situation in the Draconis Reach, the full might of the DCMS was ready. Palmyra was the designated gathering site for AFFS forces as they prepared to launch their own counteroffensive into the Reach. The Draconis Combine mustered soldiery had early warning of this invasion through their contacts in the Raven Alliance. After the death of Caleb's mother Isabella Hassek in 3130, Caleb's father Harrison had started a salacious relationship with the Raven Alliance Khan, Sterling McKenna. It is believed that McKenna had also attempted to start a similar relationship with Caleb after Harrison's death. But for whatever reason, the relationship either failed to start or went wrong quickly. Thus, it is also believed that when presented the opportunity, Sterling McKenna sold out the Federated Suns to the Combine, which is strongly supported by the Combine, granting several worlds to the Snow Raven Alliance after the fact. With the location of this mustering point known, the DCMS launched an attack on the unprepared Davion forces. Now known as the Palmyra Disaster, this cut the head off the Davion offensive, destroying multiple Federated Suns commands utterly in a fierce battle, and ultimately resulting in the death of the foolish First Prince Caleb Davion. The death of the First Prince triggered a closed-doors Privy Council election back on the capital of New Avalon. The Privy Council elected the next heir to the throne to be former Princess Champion Julian Davion, widely known as having the prior First Prince's favor, as well as the Davion lineage to earn him the succession. But he was yet still far afield on his mission to assist the Lyran Commonwealth against Clan Wolf and Clan Jade Falcon predation. Surprisingly, he had not yet died on this dangerous assignment, and upon receiving word of his election, he was forced to abandon the Kellhound's vengeful quest into Jade Falcon territory. The throne sat empty, and with so many reforms being made by his power-hungry cousin, the Federated Suns would remain crippled until Julian could return to claim it. The fact that Julian was named First Prince, as well as the death of the former First Prince Caleb, was suppressed by media outlets as much as possible to protect the new First Prince. He was yet separated from his throne by a great number of jumps through enemy territory, and news of his ascension would only lead to increased awareness of his position. Julian Davion's force made their way around the Inner Sphere, the long way, not wanting to cross through Combine territory. But this presented its own challenges. This new task force, named Navarre, gathered forces, collected former Davion members from the Republican Armed Forces and several Davion-aligned mercenary outfits, after meeting with the former Exarch Damian Redburn on the world of Callison. Clan Seafox brokered a deal with Julian, landing him the Gamma IMAG from the Tiburon Khanate at the price of 3 Federated Suns worlds. Which 3? This would be determined at a later date. Julian was in no position to balk at the price, and he accepted the deal. Stopping through the Free Worlds League and securing support from both the Republic remnants as well as the Captain General of the Reformed League, Jessica Merrick, Julian made his passage around the raised walls of the Fortress Republic. This support came at a cost, however. Jessica Merrick offered free passage through free world borders, but only if the First Prince would allow her or one of her descendants a boon to be redeemed at a time of the Merrick's choosing. Julian had little choice but to accept, again trapped by the circumstances he found himself in. This brought him to the Capellan Confederation's border without much conflict, but that would soon change. Julian and his task force did not attempt to cross Capellan borders with subterfuge. They instead opted for direct attack, first landing on the Mechwarrior system in the Tikhonov commonality. This direct attack would hopefully reduce the pressure on other fronts driving into the Federated Suns, as well as give the task force a fresh source of liberated supplies and material. Interesting to note was the distinct avoidance of civilian targets or collateral damage, but yet targets or symbols depicting the Capellan Chancellor were destroyed with extreme prejudice. Task Force Navarre kept the Capellans guessing, attacking New Canton next. Using different troops than the previous raid, Julian hoped to further obfuscate his plans and mislead the Capellans into assuming the force had split to take multiple objectives. Still in Confederation space, Julian received an invitation from enigmatic Devlin Stone, the founder of the Republic, who had recently been woken from cryogenic slumber. The invitation was to visit him on Terra, allowing Julian to bypass the defenses of the fortress. Tentatively, Julian accepted, meeting with the awoken former Exarch. Stone had an offer for Julian. The Capellans were still causing the remnants of the Republic a lot of trouble after Fortress Republic doctrine had been declared. To disrupt their operations, Devlin dangled a carrot to Julian. In exchange for Julian's continued operations through Capellan space on his return trek, he would give them a full regiment of the Republic Armed Forces troops, to be called the Dawn Guards. These troops would become AFFS commands permanently, selected from Republic volunteers. He also promised more troops would be dispatched to aid the Federated Suns' engagements against the Draconis Combine, now perilously close to capturing the capital of New Avalon. This would happen when, not if, the fortress walls came down. All Julian had to do was use these assets to continue wreaking havoc through the Capellan rear supply lines on his return trek. This would lead the Capellans to believe the Republic had a lot more reach and a lot more capable response force than was otherwise thought possible. It also implied the fortress walls were able to be erected or lowered at will. It was an attempt at bluster, and one might speculate that it showed how little faith Stone had in his own command structure's capability. But Julian accepted the reinforcements. The influx of a full regiment of trained warriors and material was an offer he could not refuse. In May of 3146, more worlds in the Tikhonov and Chesterton commonalities were targeted by Task Force Navarre's elements. Liao's response came in the form of a deployment of the 2nd Mechwarrion's Armored Cavalry Battalion, put down on Halloran 5, in an attempt to stifle the loss of supplies and prevent sabotage of Capellan installations. Although a small mercenary outfit was destroyed in this encounter, the rest of the Navarre task force remained elusive and escaped. Julian's plan had worked. The Capellan Chancellor Daoshin Liao had no choice but to halt his own offensive into Federated Suns space, diverting resources from his Cathil invasion and turning about to secure his rear supply lines. Unable to take his eyes off the Republic Armed Forces' opponents, he also had no choice but to leave forces in place along the Republic border to ward against a Republic counterattack. June 7th saw Julian Davion's personal contingent re-emerge into Capellan space near the Akamar system, now called Task Force Panoply. He ran his newly granted forces through the paces. This went shockingly well, as the Dawn Guards easily overcame the 1st Canopian Lancers stationed elements and cut a swath through the opposition in these probationary raids. Sure enough, the Capellans saw the RAF markings and colors of the Dawn Guard and reported back that they were in fact of Republic origin, disquieting Liao leadership. Continuing to Ningpo, Panoply cut through some minor defenses surrounding Home Guard depots. En route to return to their dropships, the Dawn Guard were intercepted by the remaining Home Guard defenders. Hopelessly outgunned, the Dawn Guard attempted to get the Capellan garrison unit to stand down rather than be destroyed, but the Home Guard refused, instead engaging fully. With no other option, and the Capellans standing between them and their dropships, the Dawn Guard had little choice but to put the defenders to the sword. These actions confirmed in the mind of Chancellor Daoshin Liao that the RAF were finally beginning a full invasion of Capellan space, rather than just appearing to be a simple raiding force. The full destruction of the Home Guard unit implied a more tacit threat than mere raiding had been. The identification of Davion-aligned elements also pointed to an even more troubling possibility of a Republic-Federated Suns alliance in the works. Julian Davion's disappearance from Nanking and reemergence at Akamar further supported this fact, as there was little chance he got there any other way than by direct route through the Republic. Daoshin Liao acted on this by diverting yet more forces to the Republic border and away from the Federated Suns' front lines, weakening his invasion effort. The Capellan Chancellor convinced himself that a Republic counterattack was now imminent. Soon after, Julian's task force attacked the Hessen Industrial Works on New Hessen. The garrisoning Home Guard was ill-equipped to fight a force of this magnitude, and the invaders rolled over the defending elements with ease. After this attack, the First Prince's forces dropped off the map, with the exception of a minor raid on the planet of Tigris. Unable to pinpoint their location, and unable to guess where they would next appear, the Liao Chancellor launched his own attack on the armed forces of the Federated Suns. Now absolutely convinced of the imminent Republic invasion, Chancellor Daoshin Liao redeployed naval assets to the fortress walls. Capellan intelligence, the Maskarovka, believed that they had found how Julian had entered the Republic, and sought to recreate the breach. Amassing 2 full regiments in a new task force named Chongche, the Chancellor ordered them to take advantage of the breach, intending to launch his own preemptive strike into the heart of the Republic. This task force was doomed to fail. The Republic had deceived them into believing they would be able to recreate the passage, but the task force bounced off the hyperspace defenses of the wall, leaving the transports mangled and broken, with many casualties. Now robbed of his attacking force, the Capellan Chancellor braced for Republic counterattack, shoring up the defenses of the Republic border with more redeployments, and allowing his Federated Suns offensive to wilt and die. Attempting to flush out Julian's task force panoply from wherever they were, the CCAF ordered a strike, hoping to bring the First Prince and his cohort running to the rescue. A strike force consisting of the 3rd Tikhonov Guards, the 2nd Mechwarrion's Armored Cavalry, and the 4th St. Ives Sentinels descended upon Marlette, home to an AFFS, home to a Federated Suns base. Embedded in the 2nd Mechwarrion's Armored Cavalry was none other than Denai Liao Centrella, now a Cao Shou, and given command of the 3rd Battalion. Expecting to only find defenders from the Marlette Crucis March Militia, Capellan forces were instead set upon by members of Task Force Panoply and members of Task Force Navarre working jointly. The task forces of Julian Davion and Eric Sandoval working in concert proved to be much more formidable force than the Capellans had anticipated. Naval forces of the Davions, supported by the naval assets of Clan Seafox, engaged the Capellan warship that had been dispatched to support the attack. The CCAF ship Isa Hyung managed to fire off a bombardment on the planet's surface before being broken at its keel. The bombardment, guided by the 2nd MAC Battalion, struck true into the 5th Crucius Lancer's position, decimating the Davion force. But the one advantage the Capellans had was now disintegrating in orbit. When an air raid by the 1st Kestrel Grenadiers killed the Sang Shou commanding the 2nd MAC, the sister of the Chancellor, Cao Shou Denai Liao Centrella, assumed command. The CCAF ground defenses scrambled to salvage the operation by completing their original objective, destroying the Federated Suns base, but they failed to locate it. By September 9th, with their objective yet unachieved, the Capellan leader met with Davion First Prince under a temporary armistice. Denai and Julian negotiated terms. This would only last 2 years to be broken by the First Prince later, but served to bring about an end to the conflict on Marlette. The First Prince was eager to be done with this conflict. Just prior to the conflict on Marlette, delayed by the unreliable state of interstellar communications in the wake of the HPG failure, Julian received the news that he had been dreading throughout this entire journey. New Avalon was in flames. After their stunning success at Palmyra, Draconis forces continued to coalesce in the area. Matsuhari Toranaga, the Draconis Gunji no Kanrei, celebrated his victory over their ancestral enemies and took action to maintain the momentum, instigating a drive directly into the Federated Suns' capital of New Avalon. New Avalon still had not fully recovered from the foolish edicts of the former First Prince Caleb Davion. A lot of power had been collected in the throne, and while it sat empty, it made the bureaucracy even more sluggish than usual. Both the First Prince and the Prince's Champion remained far afield, traveling through enemy territories, and were unable to coordinate any necessary reforms to distribute command, much less defend the capital. New Avalon was shielded by a stout screen of aerospace defenses, but the Combine came prepared. Multiple pocket warships, which were upgunned dropships specifically tooled to deal with aerospace combat, battered aside the defending screen and ushered the majority of the invasion force through without any substantial losses. The Dragon further softened the defenders' positions with a lengthy 3-day-long bombardment of the planet with aerospace strikes. Soon after came the full-scale invasion, including forces tapped from the 5th Sword of Light, the 2nd Genosha, and even the feared mercenaries of the Wolves Dragoons, the first Avalon Hussars, Davion Assault Guards, and the new Avalon Crucis March Militia all gave as good as they got. But in the face of multiple DCMS regiments, supported by a number of Dragoon detachments, they could do little to stem the tide. The conflict raged for weeks. Distress calls for reinforcements went unanswered. With the conflict on Marlette over, First Prince Julian gathered his troops and set out again, this time hiring as many mercenaries as he could along the way, giving them instructions to meet at Goshen in preparation of aiding New Avalon's beleaguered defenses. It was at that moment, at the worst possible time, that the Clan Sea Fox IMAG that had been assisting Julian's task force demanded their due. Left with little choice, Julian relinquished the worlds named by the clanners: Heen, Alta, Vista, and Brusette. With their contract complete, the Sea Fox forces broke off and departed, leaving a portion of Julian's forces without reliable transport to New Avalon in their hour of need. On New Avalon, the situation worsened. Draconis forces had driven most of the defenders to ground and were now working on breaking the spirit of the New Avalon people via propaganda campaigns. Over 2 months had passed from the initial invasion before the first responding units would be able to answer High Command's call for reinforcement on New Avalon. The 2nd Robinson Rangers arrived unexpectedly from an unplotted pirate point and blazed through the DCMS picket, touching down planetside mostly intact, temporarily boosting the morale of the defenders that had gone to ground. Together they managed to inflict serious damage upon the 5th Sword of Light, but a Wolves Dragoon counterattack decimated the reinforcing units, sending them scrambling. This broke whatever resistance remained in the populace and signaled the end of the defense efforts, with High Command elements and political leaders fleeing to the last remaining March capital of June. The Combine troops cut loose, ransacking the world, burning down any reminders of Davion ownership. The New Avalon Catholic Church was razed, Davion family monuments torn asunder, and most of the clergy put to the sword. The Draconis victory over the Federated Suns seemed all but complete. Back on Luthien, the Draconis capital, a month-long celebration was declared in honor of the dragon's victory. Gathering together the collected mercenary commands that he had acquired, Julian Davion, with his champion Eric Sandoval, organized the hired guns into a number of independent commands, aiming for regimental-sized formations. 2 new task forces were created, codenamed Operation Percival and Operation Cerberus. The 2 task forces would have concurrent but separate goals. Percival was tasked with finding DCMS forces in the former Draconis March, and would be led by Eric Sandoval. Task Force Cerberus was more secretive, its destination hidden from even its constituent commands. The First Prince, hearing of the AFFS High Command's relocation to June, gathered his first Davion guards and departed to attend his official coronation. In March of 3147, Julian caused a bit of an upset when he grew impatient during his coronation ceremony, pulling the crown from the hands of the blathering archbishop and placing it upon himself, citing the need to cut through red tape and redundant ceremonies. He delivered the following speech to the stunned onlookers. Our nation faces the greatest threat in its entire history. Not even the darkest hours of the Word of Blake's occupation of New Avalon, or the Dragon's advance of the First Succession Wars, can match the dangers we all face today. I did not bring us to where we are today, but I accept the full responsibility for bringing us out of this nightmare and back onto a road of recovery. Within the hour, I will depart to oversee a campaign that will change the tides of fortune in our direction. And my champion, Duke Sandoval, is even now preparing to make his own drive toward the enemies that gnaw on our flank. Together, we will ensure our enemies learn why their ancestors rightfully feared angering the Suns. I assure you all that the heart of the Federated Suns remains strong. When we, as a nation, have conquered all of the challenges on our doorstep, I will stand before you again and ask if you still wish me to be your prince.